welcome all. Welcome to this discussion on reimagining GCCs to the next tech stack. I have with me today Prashobh from IBM, who's joining this discussion with me. Before I get into the deeper details of the discussion, maybe Prashobh, if you could quickly take a 30 seconds to kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll get started. Over to you.
Thank you, Srikanth. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Prashobh Chandralayam. I'm a partner and executive director at IBM, and I look after the industrial cluster for GCC business. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prashobh. That was helpful. With it again, I think the whole topic today is about GCCs and the next tech stack. But again, all of us know that the growth of GCCs has been phenomenally good over the last many years. And as per the latest reports that we see for FY24, we see India has over 1,700 GCCs. And that's a pretty large number. And of course, we all know that some of them have been here for almost 4 decades. And the number of GCCs coming into the country is almost, we're counting by the day and by the week. With that happening, what do you think is the reason that each one of them is coming to India? What do they see in India? Why is that they want to use India for their next pivot of growth?
Thanks, Srikanth. So these are primarily a broad question, and I will try to divide this into 3 parts. The first, I'll go to your question about like why GCC, right? So let's look at the global business scenario today. The average lifespan of the organizations are decreasing, and this calls for change in strategy, trying out different business models, and courageous leadership. The average lifespan of the organization, which is listed part of the S&P 500 in 1958, was 61 years. And fast forward today, it is 18 years, and it is likely to go down further. In every once in 2 weeks, an organization which is part of the S&P 500 is going off the radar. These are dramatic changes. And these rapid changes are taking place based on 3 structural changes. Number one, there is a shift in, there's a tech stack shift, right? There's a technical revolution, what we are witnessing today, which is unparalleled until now. The second is primarily about the change in business climate. And this is underpinned by 3 structural changes or reforms. Number one, there is a recessionary fear. Some markets are already in recession and some of them are just getting into. And second, there is a geopolitical tension, and that seems to be prolonging. And the third one, there is an energy transition that is taking place. And all 3 put together, there is a new business climate or a regime change. And the third in the list is there is an aging population problem. While the rest of the world seems to be aging, there's only one country perhaps standing against the trend, which is India, right? So McKinsey believes that the 70% of the companies that is listed in S&P 500 today will be disappeared by 2027. And these are really scary stats. And innovation is critical. The single most important part of the innovation is that it create and offer longevity to the organization. And innovation is critical to business, especially given the pace of changes what we are witnessing today. That said, innovation is not easy. Rather, it is a difficult act to follow. The question, therefore, is that how do an organization create or foster the culture of innovation? There are 3 choices. Choice number 1, do it yourself. Choice number 2, bring in a management consultancy firm and take their advice, or IT organization where you can combine innovation and transformation together. But Srikanth, if this was a topic maybe a decade back, we would have been not even spending so much time because it would have been not that very relevant. But given the kind of changes what we are seeing, especially about the lifespan of the organization, it seems to be the most important question today. So thereby, how do you do innovation?
Yes.
There's only one answer, rather a short one: do it yourself. Now, the changes what we're taking place today and what we felt as the core competency which made an organization distinctive seems to be less differentiating today. That is the pace of changes what we are witnessing today. In short, these consequences are already biting. And at the very intersection, the GCC story begins. This is where the innovation and transformation meets together. This is where you primarily create the future-proofing of your IT technology. And this is where you create your digital differentiative. So GCC is not about a technical outpost which is located 1,000 miles away from the HQ. GCC is the digital HQ.
Absolutely.
And this is the time And hence, I think GCC is the most important part. One more point is that the overnight success of the GCC do have a 20 years of hard working behind it.
Yes. True. Thank you. I think you put it so very well. And I like your word, digital headquarter, right? In fact, at NASCOM, we started talking about some years ago about think digital, think India, right? And we said, if you want to think digital, if an organization wanted to go digital, I think India should be the destination of choice. And I think you rightly summed it up to say digital headquarters. I completely agree. I think innovation is the name of the game today because business as usual may continue, but if an organization does not innovate, probably at some stage they will become a dinosaur, and hence they'll have to continue to innovate very rightfully. Now, given that, I know the pace of innovation is also changing, right? Organization to organization, function to function, and so on and so forth. Now, how do you look at this? And how do you look at organizations looking at this whole innovation? How are they pacing it? How are they intertwining this with their day-to-day operations on one side? And second, they're doing it themselves. I completely agree. But how are they also enabling the larger or working with the larger ecosystem to do this better
Yeah,
and making it more efficient?
absolutely. Srikanth, before I come to that one, I just want to spend maybe a little more time on the why India story part, right?
Yes.
Now, when an organization decide to set up their GCC operation, or when they decide to expand their GCC operation, they need to primarily tackle the most important question, which is location, right? When
Yes.
it comes to location, choices are many. So they
Yeah.
have LATAM, they have the Europe, they have the ASEAN, and they have India too. The
Yes.
second part is that before they zero down to India, or for that matter, any location for that matter, they need to
Mm.
find answer to three questions. One is the economy and the political leadership. Second is
Yes.
access to the talent. And the third one is the ecosystem.
Yes.
Now, let's look at these questions from an India lens point of view, right?
Mm.
Let me start with a sentence. The transformation, what we are witnessing in India today, is unprecedented in the history of the free world. And
True.
what really fascinates me the most is that the scale and pace in which the transformation is taking place.
Yeah.
Now, all three pillars of change, which is the political, the economical, and social, all are witnessing rapid transformation all at the same time and creating a singularity of the transformation.
Mm.
And these are primarily non-linear changes and which is irreversible to a large extent. The second most aspect is that when we're trying to look at a country, we will try to divide that into three parts. Number one is that economy, right? So let me start with the economy first, right? So today, India is witnessing a growth at around 7% GDP, and which is
Yes.
perhaps considered to be like the fastest growing the country in the world. And if I were to
Yes.
just look at the GDP as a measurement point, right,
Mm-hmm.
from independence, that is 77 long year story, right? We amassed 900 billion FDI. The most impressive part of this that 530 of that 900 billion came in
Mm-hmm.
the past 90 months alone.
Okay.
And 93% of that amount came in through an open
Mm-hmm.
route. So essentially, it
Okay.
means that it doesn't need an approval. So it is
That's
not
right.
only the fastest growing, largest economy, but it is also an open economy. And that
Correct.
combination is unparalleled.
Absolutely.
From a GDP point of view, India is today 3.9 trillion and almost knocking the door of Germany to become the fourth largest. And that may happen in 2025 or 2026, and then
Yes.
soon going to be third largest.
Third.
So this is from an economy point of view, I will primarily put a tick in the box and really a big one.
Great.
And next aspect, Srikanth, could be that digital, right? Because you cannot really separate these two. From a digital point of view, the 93% of the digital transaction that took place in the world, right, last year happened out of India. And that is much higher than all other economies put together.
Yes.
And the most important part is that the shining example of the India stack was UPI. And UPI,
Yes.
and if I just look at their transaction value of last year,
Yes.
that is April to June, that was 970 billion. And that
Billion.
is much higher than the transaction that took place in Alipay, PayPal, or the Pix of the Brazil. But if
True.
I just fast forward into June of this year, that single month, it was 240 billion alone. And if that trend continues, it is going to be 2.x trillion economy just on the digital side alone.
Still low. True.
So another tick in the box when it comes to the digital side of it, right? The third one is that when we talk about digital, we need to talk about the startup ecosystem also. The
Yes.
first unicorn galloped into the scene in India in 2011. And fast forward today, we have 113 unicorns. And the
Unicorns.
combined value of these 113 unicorns are $340 billion.
Yes.
And today we have, this year alone, there are 6 unicorns. And if the trend continues, there is going to be another 6 more before end of this financial year.
Absolutely.
And going by the index of the forecast of this startup ecosystem, they are predicting there is going to be 240 new unicorns that would happen over the next 3 years, right? The last point is about the demographic profile, right? That is the most important part for anyone to set up the GCC in India. So average age of the country today is 29. And being the most populous country in the world and having the tag of the youngest nation is quite a distinctive thing. So 60% of the populations are primarily millennials. So that means that they are 800 million. And of the 1.4 billion, 1 billion are at the age of 36. Now, these are the digital natives, and these are primarily the ecosystem that has been offered to GCC as and when they set up the setup in India. And today, in flat 3 months, they could have their GCC operation up and running, and they can move 0 to 1,000 in less than 1 year. So these ecosystem play a critical role, as you mentioned about like the statistical highlights in terms of how many GCC have flourished in India, and these are the powerful ecosystem that is supporting them.
Absolutely. No, I mean, can't agree more with you. And I think the way you've kind of defined the overall ecosystem, right? It's not just talent, it's not just people. It's about the larger startup ecosystem, the agile ecosystem that you have, and so on, with which I would say complements and supplements the large GCC enterprise to make innovation faster. Now, again, I think when we're talking about all this, we can't miss the buzzword of today, right? How is Gen AI kind of, coming into this whole thing, and how is Gen AI rather helping, accelerating this whole piece of innovation in the current scenario? What do you think is that role that it's playing?
Absolutely. So, Srikant, we need to divide that into 2 parts, perhaps, right? How the Gen AI started maybe a year or year and a half back, and where we
Correct.
are today, right? Initially, most of the organization was primarily in the pilot phase. So they were trying to
Yes.
just find out like how exactly this would primarily make a difference for them. And they were trying to understand what could be the appropriate use case for their scenario. And
Yes.
fast forward today, I think most of the organization already started reaping the benefit in terms of how they have infused the Gen AI into their overall productivity. I think the most important part is primarily productivity and the efficiency. And some of the large organizations today primarily have used Gen AI effectively, especially on code creation, code validation, and in terms of creating the app modernization factory, so on and so forth. And some of the organizations started infusing AI into their HR applications, right? So most of those the mundane work could have been just automated, and they have used
Yes.
the power of the Gen AI by using certain RPI tool also, and they have created the whole ecosystem. And one of the thought process behind using HR as the starting point was primarily to provide the same experience digitally across the globe, right? Because you would
Yes.
have a distributed workforce across the globe, and not
Correct.
all may not have the benefit of having an HR person on the same floor. But in order to
Yes.
provide the consistency and the same seamless digital experience, they started using Gen AI. And today, I think some of the statistics are extremely impressive in terms of the kind of a productivity gain they have gained. And in certain cases, they started returning back some of the unspent amount back into the enterprise. And that to me is like the most impressive part. And that is a validation of that efficiency and the productivity. And more importantly, it is commercially beneficial too, right? So I think
Yeah.
the trend is just started, and it can only go up north.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I think today there is a lot of action, especially in the emerging tech space, right? I mean, and again, I'll go back to this quote that NASSCOM did some years ago, saying that this is going to be the decade, right? The decade where technology is going to make its biggest impact, is going to speak the loudest. And I think this has been a decade of a lot of action, especially in the tech side. And I'm sure all of us will agree that GCCs have contributed enormously in this space. Now, given that, I think, what do you think what do you see that, given all this, what will be the next big thing that you see from the GCC ecosystem in this whole Techade as a decade or decade of action, technology of action in the next few years?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Sriga. I think the most important thing about the ecosystem, right, going forward is going to be the access to the talent, right? Because
Yes.
initially it was all about the labor arbitrage and the cost arbitrage, but today it is about a tech arbitrage, right? And today, if you just look at the statistics, what you mentioned, there are 1,700 GCCs up and running. And if I were to just keep the multiple locations of each of the GCC, the unit number could be somewhere upwards of 2,900, and the workforce is 1.3 mil, and that is expected to go upwards to 2.5 over the coming years. The most important part, as and when an organization decide to set up their GCC tech hub in India, is basically the access to talent. Let's look at
Yes.
the intensity of the tech talent that is available, right? And so now all the people who are aspirant to write JEE, right? And if I were to just look at the start of the current year, right, the 16 lakhs people, 16 lakh students, they
Yes.
wrote to JEE, right? And that number is expected to go upwards of 20 lakhs next year and then further up on the coming years, right? And if we now just take a step back and look at the preparedness of for these students, right?
Yep.
And now they start preparing for JEE from the seventh grade onwards,
Yes.
alongside with their academic calculus, right? So that means 9 to 4, they primarily attend their class, and 5 to 9, and they attend the JE. And that happens like Monday to Saturday without a break for 6 years. Now, just look at the statistical highlights of this, right? So that is like 5 to 9. So they take 6 hours into 6 days, into 12 months, into 6 years, right? That is upwards of like 8,900 or 9,000 hours, right? Now, if you just look at the olden days, like Malcolm Gladwell told us, the tipping point, right? You spend 10,000 hours on any subject, you become a master. And that was also called as like the Olympian preparation, right? An Olympian athlete would prepare 10,000 hours on his chosen like a topic or like, his the sports. And he burst into the Olympic scene in at the age of 22. And here, the Indian students, before they blow their birthday candle of 18, they have already spent 8,000 or 9,000 hours alongside their academic, right? Now, these
Absolutely.
people move into IIT, NIT, and other premier engineering colleges, and that is the intensity in which line they studied, and they already mastered the subject, right? Now, I mentioned about like the average age of the country is 29, and the 60% of the country is millennials. So when GCC set up, like they tap into this talent, and you will never find a tech intensified talent at this scale anywhere in the world. So that is the ecosystem advantage. And other day there was a news, one of this largest semiconductor firm, they are just setting up their research center in Bangalore. And the first thing they did was that they primarily tied up with 60 colleges and universities with a mission of creating 60,000 talent pool with a semiconductor background. Right. So that intensity and that vibrant workforce is unparalleled. And to me, I think that is the most important part as part of the ecosystem. And plus, you have the startup ecosystem, right? So this is again another like a huge talent pool. And when you're primarily trying to create a co-create mode, right, with the IT service provider or the startup by using all this available high-tech talent, that's where you create your differentiated product, Srikanth.
Absolutely. And I like this analogy of the way you've brought in the training, I mean, the JEE preparation to the sport. Absolutely. And I think, see, I mean, and what you said is true, right? 16 lakh people, right? And how many seats? Probably 15, 16,000 seats. Like, it's almost like the amount of time you spend, about 9,000 hours of training. And the competition you fight out is like 1 is to 10,000. I mean, if you're one, you're probably 10, you probably gone over another 10,000 of them, and which is not easy, right? That's the kind of determination, effort, I mean, agility that needs to go into this. Very true. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think from that sense, yes, there's a lot of work happening in this space, and GCCs, I think, as you rightly said, are probably making the best of the talent that is available. Uh, in this space, right? I mean, and probably, if we can sum it up, earlier, we always say customer is king, but maybe in an industry like this, even talent is the king today. That's maybe we are going to that point where, talent is as important as anything else, and hence talent really wins, right? Skill really wins. Absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Any closing remarks before we kind of, I know I am conscious of time.
Yes, Absolutely. So the most important part is that when we primarily talk about the GCC, often like the topic that is always discussed was that it is primarily three things, right? One is access to talent, and then labor arbitrage, and the third one is IP. But in my mind, so primarily these are given as when you decide to set up this shop, right? So this is no more a differentiator because that is given. The most
Yes.
important part, and what I see some of the progressive GCCs are doing is that they are primarily rewriting their design book, right? So they are saying that the most important objective of the GCC is to create strategic surprises,
Yes.
right? Because the differentiator underpinned by the technology is now owned by the digital HQ, which is a GCC. So the most important part is to create that strategic surprises, and that therefore, just create the longevity to the lifespan, and thereby, there is a beautiful symbiotic relationship that happens between the mothership and the GCC, and then after, it would add value, right? It is not about the arbitrage anymore, but it is about creating the strategic surprise to the enterprises.
Absolutely. No, no, I completely agree with you. And thank you very much, Prashobh. I think I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. And I think your analogy of some of these things were very, very relevant. I think very easy to relate to as we kind of, hear this conversation. I mean, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to talk again. Thank you.
Thank you, Srikant. Really appreciate your time.